Welcome to Gut Podcast. I'm your host, Christiane. Gut is a podcast about people doing hard things, critical moments in their lives where they decided to push through or walk away. Today we're going to dive into the story of Maya Angelou and a quick summary of her life and some key stories that represent key gut qualities, including mental resilience, fortitude, doing what's right, and not waiting for permission. And stories of hers that are of particular interest to me. To learn more about her, I recommend reading her memoirs. Trigger warning, this episode includes descriptions of childhood sexual abuse, trauma and violence, racism, abandonment, and mental health struggles. Listener discretion is advised. January 20th, 1993, Washington, D.C. 20 million people are watching. A woman steps to the podium at the inauguration of President Bill Clinton. She's 64 years old, tall, regal. She's about to read a poem to the entire nation. Her name is Maya Angelou. And here's what few of those 20 million people knew. This woman, this towering figure of American letters, didn't speak a single word for almost 5 years of her childhood. Not because she couldn't, because she believed her voice killed a man. How does a girl who went mute at 8 years old end up here? How does someone survive the kind of childhood that should have destroyed her? And not only survive it, but transform it into art that changed the world. That's the story we're going to tell you today. But first, I need to take you somewhere else entirely. A train platform, California, 1931. Picture two children standing on the platform. A girl is 3 years old, a boy is 4. They're wearing tags on their wrists. The tags say, "To whom it may concern," with some delivery instructions. Not addressed to anyone by name. The children are cargo with a destination. Their parents' marriage had just fallen apart, and their father's solution was to put them on a train to Arkansas, alone. A porter was supposed to watch them. He got off the next day in Arizona. Think about that. Parents today hesitate to let their kids walk to and from school unsupervised. These two children can't even read yet. And yet they're crossing state lines on a segregated train, abandoned by the one adult who was supposed to get them there. Eventually they made it to Stamps, Arkansas, because strangers took pity on them. Black passengers on those Jim Crow cars shared their packed lunches with them and referred to them as the poor little motherless darlings. The girl's name was Marguerite Johnson. You'll later come to know her as Maya Angelou. In this moment, shipped off, discarded, left to the kindness or will of strangers. Before anything else went wrong, she'd already learned the first lesson. People leave. This is where her story begins. Not with the trauma that silenced her, but with the abandonment that came first. I'm going to tell you the worst thing that happened to her. And then I'm going to tell you what she did with it. 5 years after that train ride, Marguerite is 8 years old. You'll notice that her home life, her upbringing, and her parental figures are somewhat of a revolving door. She and her brother Bailey have now been summoned to St. Louis to live with her mother's family. Now, I need to tell you something about her mother's family, because it matters for what comes next. Grandmother Baxter, that's Marguerite's maternal grandmother, wasn't just any black woman in the 1930s St. Louis. She was a precinct leader. Political connections. She knew local police by name. She had knowledge of the city's unofficial economy. Her 3 sons, Tootie, Tom, and Ira, were known around town for what Maya later described as their unrelenting meanness. This is the world Marguerite steps into at 8 years old. A world where her family has some soft power. They handle problems their own way. Keep that in mind. Marguerite's mother, Vivian Baxter, is beautiful, sophisticated. Everything the girl dreams of becoming. Vivian works nights at gambling parlors. She dresses fabulously. And she has a boyfriend. His name is Mr. Freeman. He's a large man, works for the railroad. and often spends his days at Vivian's house waiting for her to return. Mr. Freeman starts paying attention to Marguerite, holding her. At first, she doesn't understand what's happening. She's 8. She's confused. And then, one day, when Vivian is out, Mr. Freeman sexually assaults Marguerite, an 8-year-old child. I'm not going to give you every detail, but understanding what happens next is critical. Marguerite tells her brother Bailey. After a series of events, Bailey tells the family. Mr. Freeman is arrested, and he goes to trial. At the trial, the lawyer asks Marguerite a question. Had Mr. Freeman ever touched you before this? She's terrified. She doesn't understand what happened to her. And she's pretty certain that if she tells the truth about earlier incidents with Mr. Freeman, her family will reject her and think she's dirty, complicit. So she lies on the stand. She says no. Regardless, Mr. Freeman is convicted, sentenced to 1 year and 1 day of prison, if you can believe it. And you'll be even more surprised to learn that after just serving 1 day, Mr. Freeman is released. He walks out of the courthouse a free man. 4 days later, a white police officer knocks on Grandmother Baxter's door. Mr. Freeman has been found dead, he said, kicked to death. Now here's the thing. The cop delivers this news and then nothing. He asks about Grandmother Baxter's health. She asks about his mother. They chat for a moment about other matters, and then he leaves. There was no investigation into Mr. Freeman's death. No follow-up questions. Everyone knew who did it, and no one was going to do anything about it. Everyone except Marguerite. Marguerite didn't know any of that. She didn't know about her family's influence. She didn't know that her uncles had handled it. All she knew was the simple cause and effect of what happened. She spoke this man's name in court. She had testified, and now he was dead. Here's what went through that 8-year-old's mind. My voice did this. I killed someone. If I speak again, I might kill someone else. So she stopped speaking. Completely. For almost 5 years. Her family didn't know what to do with her. A silent, traumatized child in 1930s St. Louis. There was no therapy, no trauma-informed care, no language yet for what we now call PTSD. So they sent her back to Stamps, Arkansas, back to her paternal grandmother, Annie Henderson, back to the place where this whole story started. Now, here's where her story could have ended. Most people don't grow from trauma. They survive it. They cope. But actual growth, the kind where you become more than you were before, that's rare. So how does a silent girl on a porch in Arkansas become the woman who reads poetry to 20 million people? The answer starts with a pot-bellied stove. Her uncle Willie worked in the family store. He had cerebral palsy. He walked with a severe limp. His speech came with a stutter. In that time and place, that made him the target of jokes and casual cruelty. But Uncle Willie was brilliant, and he was determined that these children would get an education. So he'd grab Marguerite by the collar of her dress, position her near the pot-bellied stove when it was blazing hot and say, "Now, sister, do your 6s." She learned those times tables perfectly. Decades later, she joked that she could still be awakened at 2 a.m. after a night of heavy drinking and recite every single one. But learning wasn't the same as speaking. She could recite, but she couldn't talk. Uncle Willie's teaching method, although it sounds unconventional today, was a symptom of systemic racism where a black child in the 30s had to be twice as good as their peers because they might get half the chance. So he drilled the times tables into these kids' heads. Everything changed when Marguerite met Bertha Flowers, Mrs. Flowers was what Maya later called the aristocrat of black stamps. Educated, elegant. She wore gloves. She spoke with careful diction. And she took interest in this silent girl. One day, Mrs. Flowers invited Marguerite to her house to run an errand. She invited Marguerite in after, made her cookies, poured her lemonade. Then she said something that cracked the silence open. Words mean more than what is set down on paper. It takes the human voice to infuse them with shades of deeper meaning. Marguerite already had a passion for reading and a passion for literature. Mrs. Flowers then showed her the power of using your voice paired with literature and read to her. She read to her Dickens, Langston Hughes, poetry like it was music, like words meant to be tasted. And then she gave Marguerite an assignment: memorize a poem. And when you're ready, recite it, out loud, to me. It took time. But slowly, word by word, Marguerite began to speak again. And when she finally recited that poem to Mrs. Flowers, something shifted. She realized words weren't the weapon that killed Mr. Freeman. They were the lifeline that could save her and change her life. But here's what I want you to hold on to. The silence didn't just disappear. The trauma didn't evaporate. She was learning to speak again, yes, but the world kept teaching her other lessons, harder ones, about what it meant to be black in the South in the 1930s. At 10 years old, she got a job working at a white woman's kitchen. Her employer decided that Marguerite was too long. She renamed her to Mary, just like that. Her identity was erased for convenience. Once the boss left the room, the chef turned to her and said, "Don't be offended. My actual name is Hallelujah, but I was renamed to Glory 10 years ago." Maya refused this behavior. She knew it was wrong. The next day, she sought out to get fired. She took the most expensive piece of fine china that she could find and smashed it on the floor when no one was looking. She was fired on the spot and never turned back. Or her 8th grade graduation, 1940. 8th grade graduation in American culture is a big deal. It's a pivotal point where children become young adults. The town rallied around the grade 8 graduation. New dresses were sewn, celebrations were held. And at their graduation, with everyone dressed to the nines, a white politician named Edward Dunleavy got up to speak. Instead of delivering something inspiring, he instead talked about how there was a lot of wonderful things coming to the white high school across the tracks. Microscopes, chemistry sets. He talked about the bright futures awaiting those students. And then he turned to the black graduates. He talked about sports, how some of them might become good athletes. Football, basketball. That was it. That was the entire vision for their futures. Imagine the heartbreak of those students and their parents. Marguerite felt something break inside her listening to this. But then the valedictorian, a boy named Henry Reed, did something unexpected. He led the class in singing the Negro National Anthem as it was known. Lift every voice and sing. And in that moment, she understood. Her community's dignity didn't come from white approval. It existed despite its absence. She had learned to speak again. Now she needed to learn what to do with her voice. In 1943, Marguerite had moved yet again in her short life. She lives in San Francisco now with her mom, Vivian, who's remarried and moved to California. Marguerite's enrolled at George Washington High School, a year ahead academically. Smart, driven. Still carrying everything she learned in Arkansas. Because she was ahead a year, her mom said, "You can do anything with this year." And Marguerite was trying to decide what to do with the time. And then one day, she sees something that changes her life. Women in dark blue uniforms, standing on the backs of streetcars, collecting fares, money changers at their belts. She wants that job. There's just one problem. Market Street Railway had never hired a black woman. Ever. She walks into their office at 58 Sutter Street and asks for an application. The secretary says no. The office manager's not in today. Come back later. Marguerite comes back in the next day, and the next, and the next. For 3 weeks, she sits in the dingy office. She brings books. Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, brings a packed lunch. She reads while she waits, dresses sharp. She's wearing them down. She knows it. They know it. Finally, after weeks, a supervisor gives her an application. Now here's where the story gets interesting. Because Maya Angelou, who later becomes a symbol of authenticity and truth, she lied on her application. She wrote that she was 18. She was only 15, below the legal working age for that job. She wrote that she'd worked as a chaufferette for Mrs. Annie Henderson in Stamps, Arkansas. She completely made that up, and that was also her grandmother. They put her through blood tests, aptitude tests, psychological evaluations. They gave her a Rorschach test to see if she was mentally stable enough to collect nickels. And here's the absurd part of all of this. They never checked her references, never called Annie Henderson, never verified anything. They tested her blood, but they didn't fact-check her resume. In the fall of 1943, with World War II in full effect, Marguerite Johnson became the first Black female streetcar conductor in San Francisco. Her mother, Vivian, was worried. A teenage girl on streetcars at 5:30 in the morning before dawn. So for the first few weeks, Vivian followed the streetcar in her car, with a pistol on the passenger seat. She was watching everyone who came on and came off the streetcar. When the sun came up, Vivian would honk twice to signal that she was going home. Vivian was supportive and loving of Marguerite, believing in her daughter's power and protecting her at the same time. Maya worked for about 5 months, then went back to school. She graduated from George Washington High in summer of 1944. During that time, she got involved with a man, ended up getting pregnant. 3 weeks later, after graduating high school at 16 years old, she gave birth to her son, Guy. When Marguerite told her mom that she was pregnant, she told her by leaving a note on the kitchen table. She was embarrassed and scared. Marguerite's mother, Vivian, said, "Do you love him?" Marguerite said no. Vivian responded, "Well, then I guess we have a child to raise." Vivian also asked, "What did you learn from working on that streetcar?" Marguerite said, "I learned I'm not afraid to work." Vivian looked at her and said, "No. You learned you have power and determination. With those two things, you can go anywhere." Remember that, because what comes next looks like chaos, but it's actually something else. Over the next 20 years, Maya Angelou's life looked like she was throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. Waitress, fry cook, mechanic's assistant, stripping car paint off with her fingernails, nightclub dancer, calypso singer, actress in Porgy and Bess, touring Europe, editor of a newspaper in Cairo, a professor in Ghana. She gets married. Divorced. Married again. Divorced again. She speaks French, Spanish, Italian, Arabic, and Fanti. From the outside, she might look aimless, but here's what's actually happening. Maya Angelou was collecting lives, trying on identities like coats, absorbing everything she can about what it means to be human. It's also important to note that her name Maya is a nickname that her brother gave her when he was young. He couldn't say Marguerite, so he say Maya, Maya sister. Angelou is an adaptation of one of her husband's last names. She changed her name to Maya Angelou when she was working in performing arts. In 1959, she moves to New York. After her time being an editor in Cairo, she becomes part of the Harlem Writers Guild. She meets James Baldwin and starts writing seriously. One night at a dinner party, she tells stories about her childhood in Stamps, Arkansas. The 5 years of silence. The recovery. Someone chimes in, "You should write that down." She says no, it's too hard to write about your own life. And then the host, a clever guy who knew Marguerite well, said, "That's probably true. It's probably just as well. Because to write an autobiography as literature is just about impossible anyway." And you see what he did there. He challenged her. And if we know anything about Maya Angelou at this point, we know she doesn't back down from a challenge. So she sat down to write. But what came out wasn't a memoir. It was something else. It was a witness statement to her own life. With humor, with poetry, with unflinching honesty about the complexity of survival. In 1969, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings was published. And everything changed. Here's what they leave out of the inspirational quotes. The memorial tributes and the honorary degrees for Maya. Maya Angelou was a hustler. And I mean that in the best possible way. Remember that streetcar application? That wasn't the only time she faked it until she made it. When she saw an ad for a Creole cook paying $75 a week, she walked in and announced that she was an expert Creole chef. The truth is she had never cooked Creole in her life. When a man needed someone for his dance act, she claimed professional training she didn't have. When a nightclub needed a singer, she invented herself as a Cuban calypso performer, having only ever sung in church, and she definitely is not Cuban. When she became the editor of a newspaper in Cairo, she had no journalism experience whatsoever. She worked as a prostitute. She ran a brothel for a lesbian couple in San Diego. There's a word for people who claim to be something they're not. They're liars. There's another word for people who imagine a future self and then grow into it. Dreamers. The only difference is whether it works. She wrote all about it in her second memoir because she believed young people needed to know that successful people have all sorts of skeletons in their closet. In her words, she said, "Too many people tell young folks, I never did anything wrong." They lie like that, and then young people find themselves in situations and think, damn, I must be a pretty bad guy. They can't forgive themselves and go on with their lives. The point being, the woman who recited poetry at Bill Clinton's inauguration, who collected over 50 honorary degrees, who became a signal of dignity and grace, she wasn't born that way. She wasn't exactly destined for it. She was abandoned at 3, sexually assaulted at 8, silent for 5 years, dismissed as just another poor black girl from Arkansas with no prospects. Her brother Bailey, who protected her through everything, struggled to recover from their abandonment. He never found what she found. That's not a failure on his part. It's a reminder that survival isn't destiny. She didn't grow because trauma makes you stronger. She grew because she refused to stop trying. And that's not a gift. It's a grind. The world kept handing her scripts that ended in tragedy. But Maya Angelou kept rewriting the ending. Not bouncing back, so to speak, because she didn't return to the same situations. She got fired, mistreated, and failed. She bounced forward through every setback. Maya Angelou didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for credentials. She didn't wait for the world to decide that she was worthy. She just kept moving, kept trying things, kept failing and starting over, kept singing. Psychologists call it post-traumatic growth. They've identified 5 changes that can happen after trauma. A deeper appreciation for life. Closer relationships. A sense of new possibilities. Greater personal strength. Spiritual growth. Maya Angelou embodied all 5. But here's what the studies don't always mention. Growth doesn't erase the trauma. She carried it her whole life. Later, she said she could forgive Mr. Freeman for what he had done to her. But she would never forget. Growth after trauma isn't about forgetting. It's about integration. Making meaning from the meaninglessness. Choosing, every single day, to sing. Even when you remember what it felt like to be caged. In 2014, Maya Angelou died at 86. She had over 50 honorary degrees, honored by 3 presidents. Her words have been read at graduations, weddings, funerals, moments of national crisis. But I think her real legacy is much simpler. She gave permission. Permission to people who survived trauma to tell their stories. Permission to be complex, angry, joyful, broken, and whole all at once. Permission to believe that the worst thing that ever happened to you doesn't have to be the last word on who you become. Remember that 8-year-old girl sitting silent on a porch in Arkansas, believing that her voice was dangerous? She was right. Not to put too fine a point on it, but her voice was dangerous. It was dangerous to injustice, to silence, to shame, to the idea that trauma has to be the end of the story. Maya Angelou's voice became dangerous to everything that tried to keep people caged, and she used it to set millions of people free. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill, of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. Thank you for joining us for the first episode of Gut. Please like this episode and follow us on your platform of choice.